Our PMs don't care about in-house politics or empire building, which if you are in-house, you need to care about. The thing to do if you have a job is to stay in this job, see what H2 of 2025 looks like.
I hired a junior product manager earlier this year, and within 1 week, we got over 100 resumes without promoting the role.
I would just say it's generally an anti-pattern if early startups start considering to already invest in paying back tech debt.
Oh my God, Dios mío, this is, oh my God, Dios mío.
Welcome back to Hotfix. I'm Christoph, joined by my co-host Stefan. Our guest today is Mirela Mus. Mirela is the founder and chief product officer of Product People. Product People is a fractional product management agency. This means they help companies to fill temporary product roles. Mirela has over 12 years of experience in product management, with more than 5 years as a product leader. She has worked as a fractional product manager at over 20 different companies. In this episode, we will talk about the benefits of being and deploying fractional product managers, lessons learned from a high-stake features rollout that went wrong, the concept of contract debt in B2B marketplaces, and we also discussed why mercenaries can also make great product managers. Welcome, Mirela.
Happy to be here.
Hi, Mirela. Also welcome from my side. And let me actually jump into the first question right away. So you have been working in fractional product work for years now. And could you maybe just explain to our audience a little bit what is the difference to like a traditional full-time product manager and someone that comes on as a fractional PM or a fractional product leader?
Sure. There are also different terms for this. Sometimes people call them interim or contract or freelance. Just so you know that freelance is also a legal designation in Germany. So I would stay away from that, as some companies actively avoid working with independent freelancers due to labor law protections, which are quite heavy over here. So it's better to use interim or fractional. And at Product People, we aim to build the premier destination for product management services in Europe, be them fractional/interim or advisory. So some of the things we often do are covering parental leaves or other staffing gaps, and that's like 3 to 6 to 9 or 12 months, or accelerate transformation, coach the team, help with the post-merger and acquisition, product team setup, and help them set up discovery and so on. So it's either coming from a certain need or just from a missing staff headcount that we are temporarily filling in. And then we have two main differences compared to being an in-house product manager. And I think this is also something, if you're considering to apply to us or just going freelance, that you should pay attention to. For growing freelance, the first thing is the financial part, because our people are on our payroll, so they don't share the same risks as independent people out there. And the first difference from in-house employees is that our PMs don't care about in-house politics or empire building, which if you are in-house, you need to care about. Like everyone says, oh yeah, but I'm not. No, just if you go high enough, ideally a company shouldn't have this. But the moment you're dealing with leadership is highly sensitive to cultural topics, and sometimes these cultural topics are also political. Our team has a defined career path at Product People, which is also public in our candidate FAQ, and clears ways of how they could move up to this ladder. They don't need to undermine another PM at the client or take more visibility for something. We are actually on the other side. We try to give this visibility to the people that brought us in, or the person that's approving our invoices over there, because we want to make them look good. Whereas, let's say, an in-house PM may think they can do the job of their boss and overtly or just without being aware undermine them at times, which is not always the case, but that could be a potential thinking dynamic that is different. And the other part is just the timelines. Our timelines are quite short. We come in as low as 3 months and sometimes stay towards 12 months during these transitions of parentals, hiring gaps, staff changes, reorgs, and so on. Whereas in-house employees are expected to tenure 18 to 36 months. I didn't put in 12 because depending on the company size and who you speak to in talent acquisition. For some people in talent acquisition, 12 months is almost a mishire because it's like, okay, it's the time where we were expecting this person to double down and they just leave because it's the minimum amount of time that looks palatable on their CV to move on to the next job as an in-house employees. And especially in the job market, I would caution against these very short timelines on your CV. It's not 2020 to 2022 anymore, where everything was possible and all the companies couldn't hire fast enough.
And one question to that, because I imagine between 2020 and 2022, it was amazing for a business like yours, right? Where there were hiring gaps everywhere. Everyone wanted to hire. How did this change? Now, suddenly there is a lot of PMs on the market that are searching for long-term employment. How does this impact a business like yours that is actually trying to fill gaps like with short-term employment or like short-term contracts?
That's a very astute observation. And there are some of the needs that changed. So some of the needs changed away from staffing gaps into, hey, we have more stringent problems than just a PM missing. Actually, we would like to do things with fewer PMs. Thank you very much. Or we just now stretched 1 or 2 PMs because we gave them 2 dev teams. And by the way, our designer is now supporting 4 teams because we've also made some of the designers redundant. How can we work more efficient or better and so on? And then this is where the transformation part comes in, harmonizing the product portfolio, figuring out if there's some coaching or up-leveling we can do. Can these people work better async and scale themselves through documentation? Can we introduce product ops or program management practices so that PMs don't need to think of what's the perfect timeline for an update, how that update should be written. Maybe there's just a product review cadence that goes out to all the stakeholders, and it makes things easier and smoother to scale and to run from the product team. And indeed, for these parts, we need a warm body here tomorrow. There are thousands of warm bodies on the market. So that's kind of the differentiation towards outcomes. And we actually want fewer people. How can you do things with fewer people?
So does that mean that someone that is considering to go like fractional now or going to like their own venture as a product manager, should they focus more on consulting, up leveling than actually just filling the gaps where they are? Is this what you're saying, that this is the right thing to do right now, or am I getting that wrong?
The right thing to do if you have a job is to stay in this job, see what H2 of 2025 looks like, because people were hoping for a faster recovery middle of this year. This didn't happen. US election threw in more uncertainty within Europe. So I was having an offer call with a candidate a few weeks ago, and the candidate asked me, what's our level of preparedness towards tariffs being imposed on the EU and in Europe in general after the outcome of the current US election? We already have a plan for 2025, and the way we've also diversified the location of our customers in this year, we were already reacting to Germany slowing down and not being up to speed with a few things we were monitoring. But it made me aware how much politics is now ingrained in day-to-day life. And this was a junior position, by the way, that the junior person was worried about US tariffs in Europe. So this is the level of concern, not only on the job market, but also in tech in general. Whereas 2 years ago, they would be like, this other company gave me 10K more, farewell. Or what can you do to top that up?
And I think what you said is very interesting, right? If you have a job, stay in the job so you can like go against these uncertainties. But what for people, for those that where this isn't true, right? They maybe got laid off or they got out of a job and they now see this fractional or freelance work as a way out of this extreme dependency on one company, right? I think this is the fear many people have, that if I go into the next company that might lay me off, there is this 100% decrease of my salary, right? And if I go fractional, there might be 1 out of 4 customers gets rid of my contract. I still have 3/4 of the contract. So is this then maybe the wrong time to go into this, and these people should actually go on job search, or do you think there is still a place for this in 2024?
All right. I would first unpack the fear, because going as a contractor increases the risk of you being fired by email with a 14 to 30 day notice. when you are on the payroll and a company wants to terminate your contract, and I'm talking about Western Europe, which is the mecca of labor law protection and so on. We're not talking about the US where you have the same day notice, which is, by the way, also bad for the employer, because even if you're in a blue collar job, you need more than 5 minutes of a notice if you're leaving. I was speaking with someone from the US who thought it's like, this is an absolute bad policy. You need, like, ideal scenario for a termination should be 2 weeks to 1 month. So you have a bit of a handover time. Not everyone is completely shocked that this person is leaving, and you have some time maybe to even document what you were doing, especially for knowledge work, which is super important. But over for my parenthesis. So if your fear is of a financial constraint, then I would look elsewhere. Look at where are your savings? What are your current costs? I know that after a certain age, you have mortgages and children and so on. People who are more on the product leader side, which were even more affected than individual contributors like PMs and senior PMs and so on by these layoffs, because in many companies and big ones, they just went and cut off a layer of management. So let's say on a before scenario, you had senior PM, and then on top of that, head of product, and on top of that, a director, and on top of that, a VP, and on top of that, and so on, a CPO. Now they just cut off the directors or the heads of product. And since the teams are also collapsing in size and you have fewer PMs to manage, you can stretch a little bit the line managers because they're seen as less impactful currently. And that's also the hiring moved from hiring mid-level and junior people to hiring seniors, because seniors, in an ideal case, need less management, and management has been already terminated. So there aren't that many options available. So look at what are your financial constraints and how could you make it so that's not a fear. Because also, if you go in any job and all the time you have the fear of being terminated, you're unlikely to perform very well. So fear is a good short-term motivator. There's actually a pretty nice podcast on Lenny. I've forgotten the name of the person. He was talking about layoffs and letting go of people with grace. And one of the parts was saying that motivation is fine, very short term to come from fear, but longer term is corrosive. It creates a lot of anxiety that we see people in tech are suffering for being a victim of that. So I understand fear very well, because we also risk of any client canceling on us at any time, while at the same time we have full-time contract commitments with our employees who are on our payroll. Bottom line, look at if there's something you can fix this without the need of a client over. If you can't find something else, I think freelancing is a good short-term gap solution, especially in leadership, because leadership is such a complex role that is impacted a lot by the company culture, by what leadership thinks, or I would say what executives at the company think product leadership should do. In some cases, they think it's just delivery. In some cases, they think it's more strategic or commercial focused. You don't see it until you arrive there, because everyone knows the nice things to say, or they may be at a tougher time and they seem less attractive as an employer than they actually are. So try before you buy could be a very good alternative there. In case it doesn't work out, you say, oh, well, I was just a fractional interim head of or director of product here. And if things work out, then you can convert yourself into a permanent position and you've de-risked the being let go at 6 months, because now you know what you're getting yourself into. The employer side knows also what they're buying. So it's just an easier way for everyone. As an individual contributor, I would rather look for an FTE role. And I did see quite a few people who are doing freelancing in the past that tend to exit in a 1 or 2 year mark. In this job market, I've seen even people who were quite tenured in the freelance space that passed this threshold when most people say, hey, this is like not worth my time and stress versus how much I'm making and the risk. Even long-term freelancers have started transitioning into full-time roles. And there are also some people who appear like that because, for example, they're in a country where the specific hiring company doesn't have a legal entity. And we know all the things about employers of record, but they still tend to be quite expensive and error-prone. So let's say if a company is in Germany, but then the people they want to employ are in Spain, of course, you can do an EOR, but you could also do this. So that would be a part of the nuance to pay attention to. So short answer, do it, especially if you're in product leadership. Good way to try before you buy. a good way to also fill the resume and gain new skills in a new domain so you don't get rejected by HR or talent acquisition for a missing keyword. But not a good long-term bet, especially since tech has also a tendency to age people out of the industry quite brutally.
And one last question before going to the failure story, because I think you're so knowledgeable on this, is now I think you have a very great observation that there's a lot of, first of all, freelance people going into full-time positions, but also the market is saturated with product managers. I hired a junior product manager earlier this year, and within 1 week, we got over 100 resumes without promoting the role. We only posted it on LinkedIn. We got 100 resumes in a week, and I would say 40% of them had prior product experience, which meant everyone in this pool that didn't have product experience was out before the first round. Do you think now is the worst time ever to get into product if you're not into product already?
It's not a good time for anyone. At product people, we did notice the same. So I think we had like roughly 2,200 applicants. We probably made 13 offers this year. And some of these offers are to people who've been a product owner in the past, because product owner is not product manager, but at least they know a bit of Scrum and Kanban, and they could potentially level up into a PM in 6 to 12 months with us, or were business analysts. And sometimes people had, let's say, 6 years of experience as BA or PO, but it just in these very low level type of environments where at most there was some project management and some carrying things around, but not what's expected in this current market of product to drive the commercial portfolio and make bets that even make money or save money. Maybe that's also a good segue that the internal pressure on product has increased tremendously, and it wasn't also doing well anyway. Though I think at some point there was a statistics of the tenure of CPOs, and CPOs had the shortest tenure from all the other C-level positions, which means that when either they kind of fall apart and leave, or they're exited whenever something else doesn't go wrong. It's the fault of product. Here we go, product. Here's your termination notice.
Okay, this is a very good transition to the next section, which is the failure stories. What you mentioned here is there are quite a few reasons for PMs to be terminated or CPOs to be terminated, but the question is, how can you turn this around? How can you actually do things well? So we want to transition to the main part of the podcast, which is the failure story. And here I would just give the mic to bring us the story of failure today.
Cool. And I would like to focus on a one-to-end type of story. So for an established companies, because I would have some as like more 0 to 1, but those are quite often on the market. I, of course, won't be able to give you the name of the customer or even the industry. What you need to know, it's a pan-European marketplace operating in Western Europe and other high cost of living countries. They're the market leader in some of these countries in their domain, and they have millions of users and billions of euros of revenue. So quite established, quite big, lots of things going on there. And we've been working with them for a while. And one of the initiatives we were doing there is to build less. So how could we decommission more of the legacy systems, which were also with any big company, legacy costs you quite a lot. And this was also something I have helped a private equity customer do, because they were struggling to put value on technical improvements, because like, yeah, this is a re-platforming. Why should we do a re-platforming? We want to anyway sell this company in 2 or 3 years. It's like, yes, but try to calculate how many teams are maintaining these legacy systems. Could you run the systems with 1 or 2 teams instead of 3 or 4? Because then this would be, and could you then launch in multiple markets faster the same capability rather than having to duplicate the tech, because let's say one platform is in Java, the other one is like some old PHP or whoever knows what's there, and so on and so forth. So those are the type of conversation. This was a mix of getting rid of old tech, harmonizing the product offering across multiple markets with, of course, minimal customization, but we were trying to keep this customization at 10 to 20%, because in any part you have these flavors. And I'm not saying the language or other things. This is just custom features or capabilities that are just live in a specific market, because let's say that specific market wants something different to happen. So, of course, with all this replatforming, we took a lot of things away, and that was a lengthy approval process. So maybe like one of the things to remember for this, what saves you, is if you also have this approval from C-level, especially from the CPO had signed off on us taking some toys away that sales and others were using, and some of the B2B customers were using. What we missed was that some of these capabilities were written in some of the contracts, some of the B2B customers. And this, the number of people that were not happy with this were in around 100K area. So it was smaller B2B businesses, but lots of them. And we took away something that some of them were using and liked, because we were also having a goal to increase conversion. And an easy way to increase conversions is to have the B2C users fill in fewer things when you go to the conversion funnel. So, but of course, the receiving part of the marketplace wanted more information, because then that helped them focus on the right customer persona. So when we launched this, the customer support team had a heart attack. It's like literally everything was coming there. But it wasn't just there. It was Facebook groups and everything and anything. So then that created extreme backlash internally, where there was a lot of pressure. All right, put it back, put this back. It's like, we can't put it back because we just migrated to a new platform. We will need to like build it on the new platform or do some hacky thing to make it happen. The only point where we lost this battle within the company, but it was tremendous pressure for at least 3 to 4 weeks, and it coming from sales leadership, customer support, and anyone else was like, why don't you have it there? We're being threatened with contract cancellation. There's this amount of million at risk, and so on and so forth. The reason we put it back was because it was in contracts, and some of these businesses had already engaged their lawyers to write letters that this was promised during this time duration. And there was also another product kink that we did miss, which I cannot explain because it may be traced to what that product was about. All right, so there were two things that as the product team we felt that. First of all, we were not aware that some of the contracts have this. So that could have been a better due diligence. Hey, we want to remove these. Any concerns from legal? Is there something that can come back at us? And then the other part, not knowing about that specific product use case that gave this request a bit of grounding, which was, of course, very Germany specific. But even so, with that, we could have made it in the post-core part of the funnel to make the B2C experience better and still give the B2B customers this data they were looking for, or have a different type of scoring. These are the people who fill this in, these are the people who didn't fill it in, and so on. So what we ended up doing, it was a hacky solution just for the people who had this in the contract. So we still made a lot of them happy. So these were in the number of thousands instead of 100,000. Because our goal was still to harmonize portfolio and then to have the opportunity to decide later when these contracts expired or when they get renewed without a specific clause that got in our way this time. Maybe we still do it as we planned initially. So now I understood a little bit how companies like Facebook or Google go through all of these periods of drama, that at some point the drama does cool down. The only problem is if you have a regulatory constraint or a relatively big contract constraint somewhere, because that doesn't go away as it has legitimacy. But other way, just we're upset because you took away something that we had. And by the way, your competitor had copied it in the meantime. So the competitor of our client had that as they had copied it, and we didn't have it anymore. We started out with, which was a funny situation, but that's also like not a good argument. The competitors always copy things, and that's also like a bad idea. Whenever I know the founder or your boss says, "Oh, look at this company, they do X and Y." Yeah, maybe they do it because they don't have any idea what they're talking about, or someone else told them to copy somebody else, which goes around a lot in these companies. So maybe think about it a little bit before you agree to do it. Let me know if you have follow-up questions. I tried to truncate a lot of info, so I'm not sure if the narrative came out in a way that is helpful for the PMs listening here.
So the gist of it is it's a marketplace that sells to consumers. So this is the B2C part. And then suppliers can sell their products. This is the B2B part. And I guess the B2B part.
Marketplaces are B2B2C.
Yeah.
But you have, of course, just pure B2C marketplaces like Vinted. But most of them are B2B2C because the business customers are the easiest and more profitable to monetize, right?
Makes sense. And you were responsible for the B2B platform where suppliers could
the B2C side. We pissed off the
B2C
B2B part of the platform. Yes.
Oh, okay, I see. So you took away, or you had to take away functionality from the B2C side to make the code base better maintainable. And this pissed off the B2B side because they...
Not necessarily for the code base. So that was like one of the goals of this company who was dealing with a lot of legacy code. It was to harmonize the product portfolio across all our markets with like a 10% difference and have that 10% difference where it really mattered. We didn't know this mattered and to which degree. Otherwise, it would have been a candidate for keeping and migrating. And then second, make the experience smoother for the B2C customer, because if the B2C customer needs to fill in 100 million things, then they're less likely to convert. And then our numbers go down. But it's also like not such a good experience for them. So, and that's the tension you have in these B2B2C plays. The business side of the marketplace wants to grab more, but you need to also protect the consumer side of the marketplace, because otherwise you don't have a marketplace anymore.
Makes sense. And that means that the company wanted to scale beyond several countries. In order to be able to do that, let's call it UX debt and also technical debt and also conceptual debt that you had to pay back in order to make that possible, right? And I think it's...
Yes. And it was already in multiple markets with lots of dodgy legacy code base that was extremely untenable to maintain from various perspectives. So that was also the part that also many people don't talk about, how removing things is sometimes such probably John Cutler, he has this very good narratives around simplification and understanding not only your tech debt but also your work debt or product debt, because if you have 100 million configs in 50 countries and everything is hacked together because you had to at that point, it doesn't work anymore. And then this is not very helpful for the product or the end consumer, and definitely not for the bottom line of the company.
I think it also doesn't really matter who the company is, because it's such a widespread challenge, paying back debt and also having these custom clauses in contracts, which I think is also a very common challenge in B2B. Mirela, do you have a general rule of thumb when you say, yes, it makes sense right now to pay back that debt, or it makes more sense to stack even more debt up in order to reach our goals?
Definitely when you're in the growth phase of a company, you should do it, because this was extremely mature. So they did it right, gain the market share, become the market leader in some of the countries, not the one where we had the drama, because that's why it was also the guinea pig country. You don't want to mess things up where the market is. So for example, anecdotal counterexample for a company that deals with food delivery, publicly listed in Berlin, they test in Australia, because you don't want to test in the US. So you kind of look, or you test in Austria when you're doing something for Germany. So this type of, because there are lots of things that just pure A/B tests or customer discovery and so on just takes you as far as you can, but it's still not dealing with this in production. It's also good to have sort of canary batch that basically if you release something super risky, you want to, and let's say the experiment is successful, initially you just ramp it at 10% and then 50 and then more. And when you see it's successful, you don't ramp it at 100%. You maybe ramp it at 90 or at 95 and keep that 5% batch to see how it develops over time, because you may have some negative second order effect, especially if you're dealing with subscriptions or payments or things you don't want to mess up longer term. And then you're also going to do lots of other A/B tests, right? That's not the only one. And the other PM teams are doing some other things. So that's like another way to do it, aside from testing on a market where you have less to lose just as the size of that market, or potentially it could be a consumer base that's a bit more tolerant to error because they're less mature as a consumer base. So for example, in in Eastern Europe, where they're pretty fast to adapt to new tech and new apps, they will be a bit more fault tolerant than if you're doing this in the UK, where you're competing for any percentage of users and they immediately will switch to another 5 contenders that want to take your market share.
And would you say it's generally an anti-pattern if early startups start considering to already invest in paying back tech debt, or also any other type?
Yeah, depends what you call by early. So I think at Series C or even B onwards, it's still good to think a little bit ahead. What's our strategy? What's our plan for the next year or so? Because maybe then the tech team could line up a few items that would make it even easier to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, you're fighting against non-relevance at that point. So it doesn't matter how good your code base is or how well you're doing things. That's also why sometimes we try to discourage clients if they come to us pre-product market fit, if they're not a corporate venture, right? Corporates are not going to do anything on their own. Doing a 0 to 1 via an agency or having us coordinate so that they don't end up over developing feature with some dev shop who wants to sell them more developers and so on. It's a good idea. But as a startup, one of the founding team members should do product. You shouldn't externalize this unless you're already to some degree of product market fit, have more than 2-3 PMs in-house, and then this becomes too much for the founder and too much of a distraction. But in the beginning, I would say do what's necessary to survive, do things that don't scale, like all the classical Paul Graham and startup advice.
And then one question. So you are at the point where you made this mistake, you removed this feature, customers are screaming, what's next? So not just in this case, so in general, like post removing something that was actually important, how do you handle it? What should someone do that got into the situation where suddenly contracts are broken, customers are screaming, and everyone is just screaming at the PM for removing a feature that apparently was more important than they thought?
Yeah, so first of all, even if people are upset, as a PM, you should say that it's not okay to be screamed at. They say, no one gets motivated to come to work to be screamed at every day. Of course, you understand and respect their feelings, but ask people to keep it civilized. The other part was more understanding the problem, understanding what's our wiggle room there, because it was in line with the company strategy that we do this. So we didn't go off the rails and did something that was not approved. It had a bit of a complexity that leadership in the customer support and sales department has changed. So they were like, yes, but my predecessor approved of this. And as new people say in any job, my predecessor was completely wrong and a moron, and I would have done things differently. But at the same time, the CPO who was still there had approved of this, and that was the company's overall strategy for scale and cost optimization. Then understand exactly if we need to mitigate something, what that mitigation should be, as we discovered that part with the contracts. And then we did some hard-coded things just for those specific people impacted by the businesses impacted by this change. Solve it later note of, let's see how this goes. Let's understand where the market takes us. Do we move this onto the main platform, or do we get rid of this and keep in touch with sales on contract anniversary to see how the contract evolves? And then the other part, so this is just recovering from the problem. The other part was figuring out how we don't have this problem again in the next countries we're launching, which also have their own customizations, which we had also started more proactively discovering, because after this happened, everyone, the product team knew. And then one of the PM comes in and says, oh, by the way, we forgot to look at this. And this is X% of our customers seem to be using it, but we didn't see it because it was intertwined with some other thing that we decided to migrate. To which someone in the call said, any other career ending revelation that we can discuss right now? So then that's made us more proactive. Okay, so how are we doing this? Is this time to do it right? Is it time to harmonize it? Are we proactively taking a hacky step forward so that we prevent this backlash? Because the timing of that was also set to be at a time where a lot of B2B contracts are set up for renewal. So it's not something we want to do to the sales team. that basically will put them in a worse position to negotiate. So that made us more aware of the complexities internally, and the client even took a separate interim PM for us to just look at one of the countries they really, really, really cared about, and just basically line by line list everything. And the other part, we became more proactive with dealing not only with the sales team, like we already had this fortnightly sync and a dedicated Slack channel and everything, and like some rollout timeline that they were aware of. But then they also started looking in all to the changes that we had planned, because they started panicking a bit. So we also started being more proactive about understanding not only those, but understanding overall partnerships they would be making, because that didn't come to the usual B2B sales. It was more set in the advertising side of the business. So it didn't have that much oversight, but that also had some custom implementation here and custom implementation there. And this is like 1.4 million euros. And this is like one. It's like, wow, okay, that's already significant, because we had a rule of thumb over a certain amount. We start quite paying attention, even to customizations, and that made the product in practice better.
And to this point, right? So what in my mind, what I'm hearing is that the root cause for this was that there was too much customization for each and every customer coming on, right? And I think this is something many startups struggle with. There is a new deal coming in, and sales is yet again negotiating a new custom solution for every customer. And I think in the beginning, as a founder, right, obviously you prioritize revenue over everything. Who cares if I have some customization for a customer? If they bring me a lot of money, that's a good thing, right?
Yeah,
but then it
die,
seems down the
right?
line yes, and then it seems down the line it can be devastating for a company, right? And I don't think just devastating because of the mistake, but devastating because you need to do so much. You have to think about so many edge cases for each and every feature you're building, that just building becomes extremely expensive. So what is your take on so what's the point, or how should a PM in like a smaller Series A, Series B, Series C decide, is it worth to customize here, or is it worth to not make this deal with this customer?
I think the PM won't be able to decide at that stage themselves. They could at least coach the founder through it. At the same time, even in this case, it was a solvable problem, right? So it's better to push this problem further down the line. If the company is incredibly successful, and despite a bit of unhappiness and drama, there aren't that many options on the market where these unhappy customers would go to, right? So it's a bit nice to be in this fortunate position where even, of course, they could still just turn to the direct competitor, which is quite strong. But it's still like something the PM shouldn't be afraid of. At that point, they should look more, does it fit the theme we're chasing? Are we just becoming a different product with this feature or this request? That would be more. One example, we were supporting a client in the staff scheduling space that initially was helping cafes or other type of companies that organize shift workers more in the blue collar space. But then COVID came and cafes fully shut down and the customer lost revenue. But there were other type of shift workers that were suffering tremendously from scheduling problems, and these were nurses and doctors. So that was basically a super large lift that we helped them do, sign up with a major employer in the UK and move this here. And there were a lot of these requests within the shift scheduling to tap into payroll, which we tried to stay away from, because payroll is just a different type of software. You, of course, can build it. It could be another line of business. But just dealing with the complexities of payroll is a different thing than dealing with shifts. Because for shifts, you just need to know there's of course labor law compliance and things, like if someone did a night shift, you can put them in the immediate day shift. And there are like some days that are paid double or differently depending on when they are. And there's like certain things, some shifts have different type of skills to fill in, or in some cases you have a certain budget and you need to decide, is this worth it, or do we not do the shift at all if it's a less critical time? But it's still not payroll. Payroll deals with so much more, like your tax bracket, other income, and a few other things that it just takes so much effort to get right. And you also don't know if that's the core reason, because the core reason the clients were using that specific product was to schedule their staff. So why not stay to schedule the staff? And what we ended up doing is just exporting in different formats wanted by payroll, and of course the usual CSV, and that solved the conversation for at least a while.
Nice. I think we might have just coined a new term here, which is contract debt, which I think might be something that a lot of PMs are struggling with. Okay, cool. Amazing. I really loved the failure story. Thank you, Mirela. Let's get to the last section of our podcast today, which is our provocative thoughts corner. The first time I read about fractional product management, I was asking myself, how is that possible? How can a product manager join a company and already do something productive within 3 months? Usually the onboarding time for a new product manager who starts like as a regular employee is beyond 3 months, is way more than 3 months.
Yes.
And the last time we talked about this, Mirela, you actually mentioned that this also has a lot of advantages and that tenure and also domain knowledge is actually not as important as many people think. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. So I would say for us also the results start with hiring. We just have gotten very good at hiring people who can onboard fast, accumulate a lot of knowledge, have a lower ego footprint, and so on. So it's again not for everyone as your starting questions. And I would say that mercenaries can be very good PMs, also leaning back on the previous comment of not having an empire building agenda. If you are in a full-time role, you should definitely have that, unless you want to go the principal track, but even so with that one. The other part is domain knowledge. I think it's a bit intertwined with being passionate about a specific thing, right? So some people can be super passionate about health tech or mobility or certain topics. And that also creates emotional attachment. But emotional attachment can also get in the way of good judgment, especially when making tough decisions, because an product, sometimes you have one firefighting truck, but then 3 houses are burning down at the same time. So you need to make the emotional decision of like letting 1 or 2 of those burn down, and you decide which one you're directing your saving efforts towards. Because if you peanut butter your efforts, like with firefighting, you will have all of them burn down, right? Just like fire, you either fully extinguish it or else it just continues burning. So that's also part of us. We don't need to place the whole organization. We of course act nice and are very approachable and blend in, but the people pleasing for us is more on the champion or budget owner who brings us in. So this could be a head of, director of product lead, VP of product, CPO, depending on the size of the organization and the type of intervention we're having. And at the same time, we're not there for very long. So due to the timeline pressure, this forces us to clarify our goals and thinking. So we know we don't have that much more time. So what can we do in this short amount of time, aside from the 2 weeks set aside for onboarding? And if the organization is pulling us in different directions, then we will also be more sensitive towards this problem because, well, again, we're against the timeline. We know in this B2B business, most of the business comes from recommendations, referrals, or getting clients to come back. Acquiring a new customer is the hardest thing ever in B2B. And our people are also aware of that. So we will then come back to the person who brought us in and say, hey, you gave us these goals, but the rest of the organization or your boss thinks differently. So what do we do about it? And many times we were also praised for bringing to light a lot of misalignment that even people were not aware they had. And to the people that bring us in, we're also sometimes more aligned with them than their own direct reports. Direct reports may have some needs that they feel they're not fulfilled. They think they can do their boss's job if they're already upset about something. Whereas we are there for a short amount of time, we want to make an impact, and then we're potentially moving on if a new full-time employee is hired or the existing one comes back from parental and so on and so forth.
And I have one question there, because I think your starting sentence was that mercenaries can be good product managers.
Yes.
And I want to draw one similarity. So I started my career in consulting, and in consulting, 2 metrics were extremely important: billable hours and being engaged again. So these were the 2 things that I was measured on as a consultant by my boss, making sure that I bill most of my hours to the customer and making sure that this customer engages us again in a contract in the future. This made me extremely incentivized that during the timeline that I was in, for example, 9 months, I was working on a consulting project, that by the end of these 9 months, the customer was extremely happy. I wasn't as incentivized that I make sure that 18 months or 24 months down the line, whatever I did is still very valuable. So what I did was optimize for the extreme short term. How do you balance that your team isn't just optimizing for the extreme short term at the customer so that they're happy at the end of the engagement, but that they are happy with what you build for the next 2, 3, 4 years ahead of that?
It depends if that's their goal as well, because sometimes the in-house directors or VPs of product or other people bringing us in are also not incentivized. Sometimes their investors are not incentivized for the 48 to 36 months because maybe they're chasing an exit next year and they're just ramping up on some things that matter. And that will also be a part for a PM or someone joining full time. Try to understand what your company is looking at. And in some cases, it's not transparent that the founder wants to exit the business. Many times we also find out that the business was sold while we're in there. And they would be like, yeah, 3 people knew about it, or that it's acquiring another company. So first answer is the non-answer, that may not be even in the interest of the people bringing us in. Mm-hmm. If it is in the interest, and it's communicated, then we also try to put out some advice that will be useful longer term. But many times we get brought in when things have already failed or aren't going as great. Because who wants to pay extra money for externals that are more expensive than a full-time employee if you think you can solve it with your in-house people? And there's always a risk in bringing a vendor that you may not get exactly what you want. And the other part, I would also caution that this is the responsibility of the leadership team there, because we are not incentivized with stock or yearly bonuses or anything at the client. We are incentivized as product people. So it should be the job of the people bringing us in saying, hey, we want to make this exit in 3 years. And for that, we want to increase our LTV or not do like a hacky price increase that will boost revenue for this quarter, but then have all our customer churn or renewal. So that's of course we could think about this risk, but it's better if someone articulates it.
Okay, no, and I think that's very fair. And I believe this is true for most people coming in for a very short amount of time, right? That in the end, they are incentivized to do a good job in those 9 months, where the people hiring them should be the ones making sure that whatever they do in these 9 months actually fits the strategy of the company. Maybe be sellable in 12 months or be sellable in 48 months. I think that is a very fair assessment.
And Stefan, I also thought of an example to wrap it up. At a publicly listed client, we were working on a freemium experiment. And we discovered that we could boost the incremental revenue by 1 or 2 million. And we wanted to release that in the last quarter of the year. And then the client didn't let us release this, which for me was a bit of a shock, because I thought, but we know this will make money. Why don't we want the company to make more money? And they said, no, this needs to go in Q1 because we want to be super sure that this will bring a consistent revenue uplift. We are publicly listed. So if we see like a dip, then that's problematic. We need to explain why this happened in our quarterly earnings. And my boss's boss will going to ask about it. But at the same time, we think from January is better because it's a bit slower in the market. So then the uptick will look more consistent. If there was a startup, the founder would say, yeah, absolutely, do it, money, just now. Whereas there, they were like, no, we don't want to answer to our boss's boss about the fluctuation, rather release it later because we think this is in the better interest of the stock price.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the bottom line that I get from this, that I would also put out as advice for everyone working with full-time employees, is tell your employees what your intentions are, right? I think especially as a VP of product, tell people that we want to raise money again in 9 months. So we should make sure that our initiatives have impact in 9 months, or we are trying to go public in 2028. So let's make sure that everything is geared towards our numbers looking as good as possible in 2028. And I've now worked in 4 startups, and I think almost never this was very transparent. So I think it's just, it takes extra effort from everyone as a leader. And I think all of us are in leadership positions in various startups. For ourselves and other leaders listening, is tell your team what your goals are and the timeline of those goals. If you raise in June of next year, tell your team, because then they will be able to make decisions to actually have impact until June next year.
100%.
Great. Amazing. Mirela, we are unfortunately at the end of the time. Thank you so much for sharing your journey, your failure story. I think there was a lot for everyone to take away. To everyone listening, please subscribe to our channels and leave us a review. We'll be back soon. Thank you, Mirela.